Welcome to Community Church. My name is Lou, and this is our online service. So we've been doing this whole online thing now for a little while, and I'm going to be honest, at first it was a little bit of an adjustment, but what's kind of cool about it is that the person who's across the street from the church is having the same exact experience as the person who's across the country. And over the past couple weeks, we've heard that we have people that are watching from literally Iowa, from Washington State, from Kentucky, from Maryland, from Pennsylvania, from all over the country. And if that's you, we are excited that you are tuning in with us. It's kind of cool how this has given us an opportunity to do something that we wouldn't otherwise have a chance to do. But listen, if this relationship is going to work out, there's some things that you need to know about us. We'll start off with a quick geography lesson. The first thing you need to know is that the whole state of New York is basically broken up into three parts. There's Long Island, there's the city, and then there's upstate. So that's what you need to know about that. So if one day you decide you want to come visit us, that would be really cool. But if you want to be able to get around, you're basically going to have to learn a whole nother language. So you're going to have to be able to say things like Copeg, Massapequa, Cutchogue, Nessaquag, Hauppauge, Patchogue, Mattituck, and Ronkonkoma. So you might want to do a little bit of prep work unless you plan on staying in Glen Cove or Deer Park. Now, if you decide you want to drive here or you end up renting a car, at some point, you're probably going to get beeped at by one of us. And listen, it's not because we're mad. It's not because we don't like you. It's just that we don't have all day. When you're here, you have to stop at one of the local pizzerias, like a little privately owned, family-owned pizzeria. It's some of the best pizza in the whole world. But just so you know, you're going to want to order a pie. Now, that's not an apple pie. It's not a blueberry pie. That's a pizza. And if you don't want any toppings on it, you just say regular. You don't say cheese because that means extra cheese. At some point, we have to talk about the Italians. Now, there are a lot of Italians on Long Island. Then there's also a lot of people that are partially Italian, and there's even another group that's kind of convinced themselves that they're Italian, though they're really not. But that's okay, we just let them think that they are. If you want to order Italian food on Long Island, some of the best food in the world. But what you need to know is that there's basically three ways to pronounce every Italian food. There's the American way, there's the Italian way, as in Italy, and then there's the Long Island way. Now, I didn't want to mess this up, so I brought in a local authority on the issue. This is my friend Sal. Sal grew up on Long Island, he's Italian, and he teaches Italian at a local middle school. Sal, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Good morning, Community Church. Buongiorno a tutti.
He's good. All right, so first let's talk about that white cheese. You know, the cheese that maybe like sprinkle on top of your pizza. Cheese you could also buy in the form of fried sticks, right? If you're in the supermarket, and let's say you're in Stop and Shop, and you need to find that cheese, and so you want to ask somebody who works there. You see the kid who's wearing the apron. You look at him, he's probably not from around here, definitely not Italian, you know, real fair skin, not much hair gel. And you want to ask him where it is. You'd want to use the American pronunciation. So you would just say, you know, like mozzarella or something like that, okay? Now, Sal, why don't you tell us what the real Italian pronunciation of that word is?
Mozzarella.
But here on Long Island, if you're in like Uncle Giuseppe's and you go to the place where they're making that cheese, they're making it like fresh. You can watch the insurance behind a glass case, you know, like you'd think there were sharks in that tank, right? Nope, just cheese. And they're making it over there, and you want to ask the guy to cut some for you. You have to say it the Long Island way. And in that situation, you would just say mozzarella. It's not really the right way to say it, but that's the way that like our grandmother says it, and so that's just what we go with. All right, last one. Just make sure you're like prepared here, okay? If you're invited to your friend's house and your friend's not originally from Long Island, you know he's got like no connection to like Ellis Island or the Italians or anything like that, right? and his maybe let's say his mom's making some pasta for dinner or some macaroni, and she put that red sauce over it. And she definitely didn't put the red sauce over noodles. Definitely not noodles, like pasta, macaroni, okay, maybe like penne, not noodles. But she puts it on top of it, and maybe she made like the sauce out of ragu. And you're gonna eat it, and you want to thank her for the sauce. You would thank her. You'd say it the American way. You'd thank her for the marinara. The marinara. And Sal, how would we say the Italian version of that word?
Marinara.
But now, let's say you're on Long Island, right? You're in an Italian household, and it's Sunday, and someone in that household is getting ready for dinner. That's gonna be a little bit earlier than normal, but they start making it like 11 a.m. You start smelling garlic in the house, right? And there's something on the stove. It's because somebody's making a sauce or a gravy. We would call that marinade. Yeah, it's not even close. So that's just about all you need to know about Long Island. If you're one of the Long Islanders and I've insulted you or your ancestors, I apologize. We're all a little bit different here, but I did the best that I could. Oh, actually, one more thing. If you're gonna come and visit Long Island and you're in the car with some people from Long Island, you're listening to the radio, and all of a sudden you hear a song by Billy Joel, just turn it up. And if you don't like it, just pretend that you do. All right, here we go. So if this is your first time connecting with us, we're really glad that you decided to tune in. Like I said earlier, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. And I would love to connect with you. I'd love to keep you up to date on what's going on. We're really selective about the amount of emails that we send out, so we won't bombard you with stuff, but we'd love to keep you in the loop about everything that's happening here. If you go to communitychurch.net/connect, there's a little form on there. It'll take you about 2 minutes to fill out. But if you do that, it'll help us to stay in touch with you, help you to stay in touch with us. And then we'll send you a little card, a little gift card in the mail, just because we love to know when we have new people tuning in with us for the first time. So since we started doing this whole online thing, we started playing a game called Where's Tom? Now, we weren't planning on making this an every week thing, but it's been a huge hit, and I think some people would be pretty upset if we stopped playing it. So we're gonna keep doing it. Basically, here's how it works. At some point from the start of the video all the way to the start of the message, we hide a really short clip of Tom playing the drums. Now, Tom is an associate pastor here. He runs our community groups. He also produces all the music that we play. So if you find him somewhere hidden in the video, if you are one of the first 5 people to find him this week, you will get a prize sent to you in the mail. We've been doing like 10 and 15, but it's crazy how many people have found it. So this week we're gonna make it really hard, and it's only gonna be the first 5 people to find it. So good luck with that. If you find them, you go to communitychurch.net/connect. You fill out that form, and at the very bottom, you put the time in the video that you found him, and we will send you a prize in the mail. So good luck with that. Where's Tom? Every single week we have programs for kids along with the adult service that we produce. There's a program for preschool, a program for elementary school, and for preteens. It's a lot of fun. Every week my kids watch all 3 of them because they want to, not because they have to. So if you have kids, pass it on to them. I bet you they'll like it. It's been amazing over the past several weeks to hear the stories of hope and encouragement that are coming in. And that's happening because generous people are supporting us financially so that we can continue to do what we're doing here. So if you want to partner with us financially, you can do that at communitychurch.net/give. But if this is your first time, if you're new, please don't feel any pressure to give. We are just glad that you decided to tune in with us today. Since this whole pandemic started, we've been trying to do whatever we can to figure out how we can best support the people in our community. And recently we found out that there's a tremendous need at the local food banks, the food pantries. They're busier than ever, they're being counted on more than ever, and they need our help more than ever. But they really are not looking for a lot of individual donations because that brings a risk of contamination. So they've asked for financial support. We started a 10-day project a few days ago, 10-day project called Pass It On. And basically the idea is that some of us just kind of came into money that was sent to us from the government that we weren't expecting, and for some of us who haven't been affected financially from this whole pandemic, for some of us, we weren't counting on it. And so basically it was just a creative way to say, hey, what's a cool way that we can continue to spread hope, maybe by passing on some of that money, or maybe even, if you're feeling crazy, maybe even all of that money to people who really need it, people that are dealing with the reality that they need help to feed their families. So if you want to do that, you can go to communitychurch.net/pass it on. But this is not a twist your arm thing. This is not a make you feel guilty thing. If you want to join in with us, if you want to join in this opportunity to do something kind of cool, we would love to have you do it with us. Finally, I mentioned earlier that we have people all over the country who are tuning in with us, which is pretty cool. We have a lot of limitations. We have a lot of restrictions right now because of everything that's going on in the world. But one thing that's cool is that our potential to spread hope has really multiplied exponentially because everything is online. Our biggest limitation on a normal Sunday when we're meeting in person, our biggest limitation is location and capacity. It takes a long time for people to get here, and we don't have that much room for people here. Now it takes people 0 time to get connected with us, or maybe 30 seconds to sign on to the internet, right? And we have unlimited seating, and you can sit on your couch, in your car, whatever. So all that to say, now is a great opportunity to share this service or to tell other people about our church if they aren't connected with another church. If you want to help us to spread hope, pass this along to people that you love. So that's all I've got for you here this morning. You're about to participate in our online service. You're going to hear a song that's put together by our team, even though they were not physically together. And then you're going to hear a message, the conclusion of our series called Pandemic, before we start a brand new series next week. So I hope that you enjoy this morning's online service.
Come, let us bow at his feet. He has done great things. See what our Savior has done. See how his love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquer the grave. You free every captive, break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You've been faithful through every storm. You'll be faithful forevermore. You have done great things, and I know you will do it again. For your promise is yes and amen. You will do great things. God, you do great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquer the grave. You free every captive, break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awake and alive. break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You have done great things. Oh God, you do great things.
Well, today we are wrapping up a series called Pandemic, which we called Pandemic because we're in a pandemic. And really the whole idea of this series is to take the brutal facts, right, the unfortunate realities of our current situation and kind of grab the bull by the horns and just figure out the best way to deal with these things. So this is the second part of our series, but really it's the third part of the series, if you count Easter Sunday. So on week one, what we talked about was social distancing, right? The whole idea that we can't see each other. And that stinks because we are relational creatures, right? We are relational beings. We need to be connected with one another, and distance is making that a really difficult thing to do. But what we said was that if we're able to find common ground, then distance will not equal disconnection. Then last week was Easter Sunday, and like I said, we didn't really brand it and frame it as the whole pandemic series, but really we're talking about the same stuff, right? We're talking about living this what-if life, just like the painful reality of instability and uncertainty and how hard that is to deal with, and how on Easter Sunday, right, when the most loving being in all of existence proves that he is also the most powerful being in all of existence. He's proving that he's the one that can determine our destiny. And so it can bring us from that what-if life where we're constantly questioning the uncertainties, the instabilities of life, to the even-if life, where we know that there is someone who loves us who is not unaware of everything that's happening. Now, this week we're talking about something else, and this is a thing that I think just about everybody's dealing with, but if somehow, miraculously, you are not dealing with this thing right now, at some point in your life, you will deal with it. So to start out, I want to tell you a story, or maybe ask you a question. Think about the first time you were afraid. Can you remember the first time you were afraid? Or maybe the first memory you have of fear? I remember when I was younger, I had this crib, and I got out of the crib and moved into a toddler bed, right? And my toddler bed was this Sesame Street toddler bed, so it had Big Bird, and I don't think Elmo was around yet, but some other Sesame Street characters right across the headboard. And then there was Cookie Monster. Now, since then, me and Cookie Monster were like totally cool. But at that point in my life, his googly eyes freaked me out. And there was something that was so unsettling to me about his, like, you know, one's looking this way, one's looking that way, and he's just right over me while I'm sleeping. And I couldn't sleep with him doing that. So every single night, I would take my pillow and I would put it over his face. And I remember going to my parents and telling them that he kind of bothered me, that I was scared of him. And any other time I went to my parents as a kid, I remember being told the same thing. It's okay, you don't have to be afraid. Why? Because there's nothing to be afraid of. But as you get older, we're kind of forced to deal with an unfortunate reality. Sometimes there are things to be afraid of. And so, what do you do when there is something to be afraid of? How do we handle that as adults? I was listening to a podcast just a couple weeks ago, and the guy was saying that right now we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody knows that. But he said we're also going through a pandemic meaning all people, a pandemic of fear, a pandemic of anxiety. And so what that means, think about this. What that means is that if you are sick or were sick, or if you're going to be sick, you are fighting a battle that's in the body, right? But if you are not sick and you have to deal with just the effects of COVID-19 and everything that it's doing to our culture, then you are fighting a battle that's in the mind. And I would argue that the people who are sick, that are fighting a battle in the body, are also fighting a battle in the mind. This whole period of adjustment and uncertainty is a battle in the mind. And now think right now, just look at our culture. If you watch the news, all the precautions that are being taken to protect the body, right? Are we taking equal precautions to protect the mind? What are we doing? What are we doing? Think about this. What are we doing to protect the heart, to protect the mind in this battle, this pandemic of anxiety? I used to work at a youth group at the last church I was at, and one thing that I always told the students over and over and over and over again, they get tired of it, and if you stick around, you'll hear me say it here over and over and over again. It's that outside issues are caused by inside problems. If you see an issue with a person, a personality, a relationship, a friendship, a marriage, a family, if there are some outside issues there's some problems in that situation, it's caused by people who have inside problems. And anxiety is one of those things that it's an inside problem, and it causes us to react in all sorts of different ways. For me, I don't know why, but anxiety makes me angry. Like, if you see me and I'm being a grump, I'm just in like a bad mood, 9 times out of 10, it's not because I'm actually angry, it's because I'm anxious about something. That's what it looks like for me. If I'm in the house and I hear a big bang or like a crash followed by a young voice screaming, meaning somebody's hurt, my natural response is anger. I get mad and I go running to the scene, which makes everything worse, by the way, because now you have a crying child and an angry grown-up. But that's my problem, right? That's the thing that I've got to work with. But it's because there's an inside problem that's causing an outside issue. So how is your mind? How are you doing internally? How are you doing in the battle of the mind, the battle against anxiety? This isn't a sprint. This is something that may last for a little while, and we need to learn how to run this marathon, this battle of the mind. The brutal fact that we're dealing with today is that we are in a pandemic of anxiety, and we need to figure out how to handle it. So today we're going to look at a passage, and for me, I think this is the most helpful passage in the entire Bible when it comes to anxiety. But I didn't always feel that way, and I'll explain that in a second. Now, I'm big on the source of advice, right? So if you're like a terrible cook, no offense, I don't really want to hear your advice on how to cook if you don't really know what you're doing. If you're not a good basketball player, I don't really care what you have to say about the sport. I'll be nice, I'll listen to you, and maybe take what you say into consideration, but it really doesn't mean too much. So when it comes to anxiety, I want to hear from somebody who has either dealt with it or has a reason to be anxious. And the passage we're looking at today is part of a letter. It's an ancient letter that was written to a church in a city called Philippi, a brand new church, and it was written by a guy named Paul. We've spoken about Paul before. Paul's one of the most influential people who's ever lived, and he's written most of the letters in the New Testament. Now, Paul lived one of the most epic lives ever, but if you look at just the events in his life, he also lived like one of the worst lives ever. He was constantly fearing for his life. There were always people after him. At one point, like, he was beaten over and over and over again. He would travel from city to city, knowing that there were people there in that city that wanted his life to end. At one point, he was stoned. Not the kind of stoned maybe that you're thinking of. He was like, this crowd decided they were going to turn on him. They formed this big circle around him, and they threw rocks, stones at him until he died. And they, obviously he didn't die, but they thought he was dead, and so they stopped, and they walked away, and then he got up and continued on. But that's the kind of life that he lived. He had reason to be anxious all the time, and here's what he says. This is in chapter 4 of the letter we call Philippians. He says, ready? Talking about anxiety. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm when I'm afraid or anxious, the last thing I want to hear is somebody say, don't be afraid, or don't be anxious. It's like, well, gee, thanks, right? I didn't think of that. It's as if there's like some switch I could just turn off and make the anxiety go away. Like, didn't think of just not being afraid. And like I kind of said earlier, this passage for me was a little bit frustrating when I was growing up. There were some times in my life where I dealt with like some pretty serious anxiety. And every time I spoke to a Christian or religious person or a church person about anxiety, I would get the same answer every time. They would bring me to this passage, and what they would say is, well, don't be anxious, just pray, right? By prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. Just don't be anxious and pray. And it's really like it's just the Christian version of the do not be afraid. And if you know how the verse continues, it says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It's like, the advice I was getting was just, when you're afraid, just go pray about it, and then the peace of God will come. Like, as if, it's just gonna, I'll pray, I'll say, oh God, like, I'm anxious, nervous, afraid of this thing, and then the peace just rains down. And maybe your experience was different, but for me, that never happened. And so anytime something came up that made me anxious and I was just told to pray about it, it was just frustrating. It was frustrating. Until I understood something about this passage that I hadn't understood up until that point. If you look now, okay, a little disclaimer here. Normally, the Bibles that we read are in English, right? The New Testament was written in a language called Koine Greek. That was the original language. It means common. That was the known language in the Roman Empire. And normally, your English translation is more than sufficient for you to get what you need from the writings in the Bible, right? But every once in a while, there's something that doesn't translate as clearly into English as there's a message that's not as clear in English as it was in the original language. And so every once in a while, if you feel like, something doesn't seem right or something's not working, go find out more about it. Go talk to somebody who maybe is more familiar with the original language or could show you another translation. And this was one of those things for me. It was like, this just doesn't make sense. It's not working. And now I'm anxious. And I feel bad about being anxious because my prayers, for some reason, my prayers aren't getting through because the peace of God is not raining down like it was supposed to, right? So here's what Paul says. He says, do not be anxious about anything. But in every situation, every time you're anxious, he says, by prayer and petition, prayer word, petition, also a prayer word, with thanksgiving, also a word used often when talking about prayer. He says, present your requests to God. Now, in this sentence, in the original language, there is one main verb in this sentence. There are three words that have to do with prayer, and there is one main verb. The main verb in this sentence is not a prayer word. It's the word that we translate present your requests, or present in the phrase present your requests to God. the word means, it's used often in the context of revealing a mystery or communicating something that has been hidden, like getting to the bottom of an issue. What Paul is saying here is, when you're anxious, bring to God what it is you really want. He's saying, get to the bottom of the feeling of anxiety. Think about it like this. When I was living, like before we moved to the Babylon area, Allie and I were renting this place, this little tiny place, and our garbage cans were outside because we didn't have a garage. And there were these raccoons that loved the garbage. They were in there almost every single night. No matter what I did, it was like their hot tub, okay? Like, they were there all the time, and almost every morning there'd be a mess outside. It was frustrating. I hated it. But one night I had to go get something for my car, and I wasn't thinking about the raccoons, and I run down the little steps, the little porch steps, and I get right to the bottom where the garbage can is, and this thing, like Oscar the Grouch, just pops the top open, and we make eye contact, and this rush of adrenaline just goes through my body. It was terrifying. And we look at each other, and we both took off in different directions. I think I lost 5 days off of my life. It was a horrible experience, okay? I was scared, if you can't tell. I'm not super brave when it comes to wild animals. Now in that moment, if you were to ask me, hey, what happened there? I would tell you I was afraid. In my mind, the surface level conscious feeling was fear. It was, I'm afraid of that raccoon. And so my body's saying, run, get out, get away, okay? But there are things that I think, there are beliefs that fear is built on. In other words, if you were to ask me what happened there, I would say, I was afraid, okay? Then maybe you'd say, why? Let's get to the bottom of this. Why? Well, I was afraid maybe it would attack me. I was afraid maybe if it tried to attack me, it would hurt. Maybe I'd get, scarred. Maybe it would tear my face off, right? Or maybe I'd get some kind of crazy raccoon-related disease, And as we go deeper and deeper and deeper, there are all these things I believe about raccoons that are causing this fear to rise to the surface. It is the same way. It's the same way with our anxiety. And what Paul is saying is that we need to get to the root, to get to the bottom. We need to reveal those things when we're praying to God. Not that God doesn't know about it, right? It could also be translated reveal them with God, but he's saying get to the root of what is making you so anxious. So think about it like this, right? Maybe I turn on the TV and I hear the economy is going to plummet, right? Or some other bad news. And what happens? I hear it and I feel anxious, right? And what most of us do is we take that feeling of anxiety, we put it on, and then we just walk around with it and live with it and be like, oh, I'm anxious because I just heard some bad news. Then we hear some other bad news, we put that on too. And then there's all this anxiety that's causing us to live in ways we don't want to live. It's exhausting, it's taxing, it is not good, it is not healthy, and we just carry it. We just carry it, and nobody wants to do that, right? What Paul is saying is that you need to go deeper. Go deeper into that anxiety. So maybe you feel anxious, right? You hear bad news on the news, right? Anxiety's economy is not doing well. Okay, you hear that. Saying maybe you get alone, right? Go somewhere just for a few minutes to pray. And maybe this is totally new to you. Maybe it's kind of uncomfortable. And it definitely, if it's new, it definitely will be uncomfortable at first. But maybe you just get away somewhere to pray. Maybe you get in your car if you can't find a quiet place in your house like me right now. And just drive away, but get alone, right? And maybe you just go and you bring that anxiety to God by prayer, petition, right? And just say God, I am anxious about what I heard about the economy. And we go deeper because I'm afraid that it might cause bad things to happen to my business. My business might plummet. And I'm afraid, let's go deeper, right? I'm afraid that if that happens, well, maybe I'll lose my job. And if that happens, well, maybe I won't be able to find another job ever. And as you go deeper and deeper, what you'll see is that often those reasons for being afraid get like less and less realistic or less and less logical. But fine. Maybe we'll say you'll never find another job again. Okay, right? Let's go deeper. And if I can't ever find a job again, I'll feel like a failure. And the reason I don't want to feel like a failure is because I believe that my worth as a human being is tied to my ability to produce something, to perform. And boom, there it is. We have gotten to the root of your anxiety, at least in that situation, right? And there's the belief that all of those things are built on. And that's something we can work with. The belief that my self-worth, my sense of value is tied to how I can perform. That's something that we can deal with. And what Paul says is if we get to that, then the peace of God, the peace that comes from God, or maybe like to clarify, we might say the peace that comes from what God says about you. What God says about you will guard your hearts and your minds. We know, like with that situation specifically, this is just one, but with that situation specifically, we know that God says that my value is not tied up in how I can perform or in what I do or don't do or whether I'm good or bad. My value is tied to what He says about me. In other words, we could say that all of our fears can be traced back to something we believe. Something we believe. And if we can correct what we believe, we can conquer our anxiety. If we believe what God says about us, and we can dispel those lies that the fears have built themselves on, we will gradually start to work away our anxiety. What we feel, what we fear is determined by what we think or what we believe. And here's what he says about that peace. He says, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. Some versions will say surpasses understanding. Now, a lot of times we take that phrase to just mean like there is no logic behind our peace. Like nobody understands it, there's no logic. We're just irrationally peaceful. And that's not what that means. The word there, it has this idea of superiority. Like God's, the peace that we feel, the calm that we feel that comes from what God says about us, the word means is superior to, is better than understanding. Meaning it is better to be confident in what God says about us than it is to be certain about our circumstances, than to just have knowledge of our circumstances. Because even if you find out like, okay, actually no, the economy is going to be fine, right? There's going to be other things. There's going to be other things that make us anxious. And if we have peace, like internal rest, internal calm, if the storms within us are calm, then we can handle the bad news. Our emotions won't be subject to the constant flood of bad news that we're getting. God's peace, the peace that comes from what God says, is far superior than simply having certainty about your current circumstances, because they won't stay certain for long. So he says it surpasses knowledge. It surpasses understanding. And then he goes on. He's not done yet. Okay? And this, I think, is just as timely for what we need to hear right now. He says, finally, brothers and sisters. He's talking to people that he loves. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. He says, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Think about these things. Remember, to conquer our fears, we have to correct our beliefs. We have to correct what we think. And so here he's saying, like, find the good and fix your mind on those things. Most of us are very familiar, in fact, all of us are familiar with disciplined action, right? There are certain things we will do, and there are certain things we will not do. What Paul is introducing here, what he's explaining, what he's suggesting is disciplined thought. Disciplined thought. This disciplined thought will result in disciplined action, but is way more rare than disciplined action. Most of us don't give too much thought to what we're thinking. Like, if you plop yourself down in a corner and just think about all the bad things that could happen in the next couple months, you won't want to get out of that corner. Like, you can go to a really dark place really quickly. What he's saying is that we have to be disciplined about what we're thinking. And so here we have two things. Right? He's saying, like, with prayer, like with the things that we are already anxious about, he's saying, deal with the things that you're thinking, with the things that have already gotten in, and decide what you're going to continue to let in. So here's my question. Here's what I want you to think about. Right now. How is your emotional and spiritual diet? Are you deciding what comes in? Or are you just letting it happen to you? Think about what a normal day looks like for you, right? For some of us, we wake up, maybe you wake up to a text message from your school district saying your kids aren't going to go back to school till 2025, right? Or they push the date back a little further. That's bad news. It's just a reminder, okay, like more adjustment, more changing to plans. Now I got to figure out the summer. Now what about camp? Now what about and all these questions. Okay, all right, whatever. And then you yank yourself out of bed and you open up Facebook, and nobody's talking about anything but COVID-19 on Facebook. So then you put your phone down, then you go in the kitchen, right? Or maybe you turn on the TV, and then you turn on the news, and you are not hearing anything good on the news, I promise. Well, mostly terrible things on the news. In fact, on ABC News, when I go, come home from work in the evening, I'll turn on the ABC News app, and every day they have this COVID-19 update. It's horrible. It's the worst thing in the world you could possibly watch. It's red. They have this red title frame that says COVID-19. Then there aren't even any words. It just plays this horrible, stress-inducing, death, Jaws-like music that just like I could say anything with that music behind me and it'll give you anxiety. And they're just telling you about all the terrible numbers, all the horrible things that are happening because of this disease. And I'm watching this the other night. I'm like, why am I watching this? Like, there are probably less anxiety-inducing ways to hear this news. But we just go through that. And maybe you're listening to that too, right? And so it's you wake up to a text message, you go on Facebook, you turn on the news, and then you got to homeschool your kids. And that's another reminder that things are not good. Or maybe you've got to go to work and everything's different. There's no one on the road. More reminders that things are not good. And then all throughout your day, it's another thing after another thing after another thing after another thing of things that are not excellent, are not pure, are not lovely, are not admirable. And it's more and more anxiety-inducing things. What things are you feeding yourself that are producing hope within you? Or maybe more applicable to this passage, right? If how we feel is determined by what we believe, by if the peace of God comes from what God says about us, then what are you doing to remind yourself about what God says about you? Remind yourself of what God says about you. Those are the things that are going to push you through this. And most of us, unfortunately, don't think too much about our emotional and spiritual diets. That's why we're continuing to do services online. We could just close things up and say, okay, here's a little pamphlet. Read this week for church. But we're trying to continue this because we want you to fix your minds on things that are healthy, on things that remind you that there's a God who loves you, that he hasn't forgotten about you, that he cares about you, and he will bring you through this if you let him. That's why we started community groups, so you can have other people, you could talk about your struggles together, and you could be like led in the direction of hope. It's why we want you to be reading this stuff for yourself, so you could see that there is a God who is good. Feed yourself with hope, things that are good, excellent, praiseworthy. So, when it comes to our feelings of anxiety, whatever it might be, no matter what your situation looks like, maybe it's COVID-19 related, maybe it's not. What I want to invite you to do is take time, and again, like I said, it might be uncomfortable at first. Maybe you take time alone. Maybe it's the first time you ever do it, and you just say, God, I'm scared. I'm scared about what I heard about this. And then ask yourself, why? Go to the next level and the next level until you get to the belief, what you think that is causing that fear, that those fears have built themselves on. And then you have something to work with. Then you could have something you can investigate, right? So take your anxieties to God. Get to the bottom of them. That's really what therapy is. And maybe the best thing for you right now would be to get connected with a therapist or contact us and we'll connect you with somebody. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to help you get beneath the layers of that fear. Ultimately till you find the belief that fear is built on. So deal with what's already gotten in. And then decide what you're going to continue to let in. This week, or maybe today, right? Maybe you got some time. Some of us have a little extra time lately. I want you to just take a couple minutes to think about a typical 24-hour period for you. Think about your emotional and spiritual diet. I'm not telling you to be oblivious and just like turn off TV and pretend like everything's great. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying look at the bad news you're hearing and compare it with the amount of good news you're hearing. Compare what the world is telling you about the hopeless situation in our society right now with what God says about who you are and how your story will end. And I'm confident that if we put this into practice, then the peace, the tranquility, the calm, the relief, the rest of God, the peace that comes from God, what God says about you, who you are, and how your story will end. That peace which transcends, which surpasses, which is superior to understanding of your current circumstances, that will guard our hearts and our minds. It'll help us to win the battle in the mind. And what we'll see is that if we put this into practice, we might come out of this stronger than when we went in. Get out of my cans. Get out. I see you. We're not friends. Get out of here. There's one. I think maybe that's Mama protecting the babies in the garbage cans. Allie, come here. Oh boy. Oh, he's not scared. I think that's Mama. Look at this. Allie, come here, quick. One's gonna protect the other one now. Look at this. Look, she's not backing down. They're in the cans, and this one is like now ready to fight me.
Okay, well then.
Can you hold the phone? Don't you dare go in that can. You go, tell your friend to get out of the can. They're inside the cans having a grand old time. It's like a hot tub. Allie, look. She's coming to the door. Riley, look at this. It's like she wants to get in.
She probably does.
Why? You think she's protecting like her kid or something in there? Well, thanks again for connecting with us this week. I hope that this morning was encouraging to you. Just a quick reminder, if you're new, we'd love to connect with you over at communitychurch.net/connect. And also, if this was helpful to you, to take just a second to pass it on to somebody else. If it was encouraging to you, hopefully it'll be encouraging to them as well. Otherwise, I hope to tune in with you again next week at the start of our brand new series. But until then, have a great week.